Ginadu, a renowned rainmaker, once lived in the eastern part of Africa. He was an agile old man in his late 80s and had served the king and the people of Dandi village wholeheartedly since he was made the rainmaker. Ginadu was highly respected and had lived long to witness different times and seasons. He inherited the post of a rainmaker from his great-grandfather when he was about 18 years old. Ever since then, he had held the office and staff for several years. This made him feel irreplaceable. When the king, Rafu, died, Ginadu believed he would be told to look after the affairs of Dandi village as a regent until a suitable person is found to wear the crown. This was because the late king had no living son to inherit the throne. 20 years ago, there was war between the people of Dandi and Gada, a nearby village. All the male children from the royal family in the land of Dandi were killed, including the late king's sons. It was a terrible disaster. Afterwards, the late king tried all his best to give birth to more male children, but to no avail. He even married more wives just to get a son to inherit the throne, but they all gave birth to female children. After the king's death, it became difficult to choose the new king since there was no crown prince before his death. The kingmakers held a series of meetings for 21 days before they came up with their final decision. Prince Goya, the son of Burundi, who was the younger brother of late King Rafu, shall be the next king of Dandi village, one of the kingmakers announced. This announcement displeased Ginadu. He frowned and thought, how can this small boy of yesterday rule us? He had been carried away secretly to the white man's land during the invasion. How can such a boy from abroad know our tradition, let alone the people? Different questions filled the rainmaker's mind. He called the kingmakers to point out the errors they had made, but they refused to listen to Ginadu's complaints about the prince, the selected king. On the first day of the 7th month of the year, Prince Goya, the son of Burundi, the grandson of Jephthah, who was about 30 years old, was crowned the king of Dandi village amidst jubilation and rejoicing. Despite having stayed in the white man's land for so many years, he was humble enough to learn the tradition and culture of the land. He mastered his native language and communicated effectively with both the poor and the rich. He was loved by the people because they enjoyed his style and manner of ruling. Ginadu, on the other hand, was secretly and patiently waiting for King Goya to make a mistake, even a slight one, but he waited in vain. King Goya ruled with love and fairness just like his uncle, the late king. With the experience he had in the white man's land, he built modern facilities for the people to enjoy modern technology. In less than 5 years, King Goya turned Dandi village into some paradise. Despite all these developments, Ginadu was still not pleased with the fact that Goya was made the king. The slight mistake he longed for finally came in the 7th year of King Goya's reign. This opportunity came on the day the king was launching a new project in the village. He invited all his friends from abroad to come and celebrate with him on this landmark achievement. His white friends were happy to visit Africa for the first time. The people gave them a warm welcome and some were thrilled to see a white man for the first time ever. King Goya introduced his chiefs and all the kingmakers to his white friends, but somehow he forgot to introduce the rainmaker. It was not intentional at all. The people that were supposed to notify the king about this error were also carried away with the current excitement. Ginadu was extremely angry with what the king did, coupled with the fact that the people of Dandi refused to reference his presence. He was highly embarrassed for not being recognized for what he has done for Dandi village. He thought of how he would punish the disrespectful king and his people, who have proved to be ingrate. Ginadu waited for the visitors to go back to their country, before he took action on the king and his people. He directed his grandson, living with him, to store enough water and food that can last them for a long time at a cave in the woods. After ensuring he had enough water to use, Ginadu went out at midnight with the staff in his hand. He started to make some incantations in an unknown tongue. With this, he cursed the king and the people of Dandi village. Let the rain cease in the land of Dandi, and make King Goya and the people suffer the pain of thirst and hunger for a long time. It was still the rainy season, but rain refused to fall in the land of Dandi for 7 days after the rainmaker had laid a curse upon them. The farmers began to complain due to lack of rainfall. This made the people experience a shortage of food and poor water supply. Gradually, all streams and rivers in the village started to dry up. There was no rain to germinate the newly planted seeds and no rain to sustain the growing plants. Extreme hunger and thirst became the order of the day. The drought lasted for a very long time. The people had never experienced such things in the land. They had to cry out in pain for help. King Goya had sent for Ginadu several times to help them find a solution to the lack of rain, but the old man kept saying, until the people repent of their sins and iniquities, there would be no rain in the land. The people asked themselves what type of sin they had committed so they could stop and repent, but Ginadu refused to tell them. He wanted them to suffer with their king. The last time the king sent for the rainmaker made him angry. The rainmaker did not only answer the king on time, but when he finally came to the palace, he said there was no solution to the problem at hand. This made the king leave the land to find a solution to the problem by himself. On a fateful day, King Goya, disguised like a villager with no crown on his head, no royal accessories, nor garment and guard. He didn't want to be recognized by anyone. Only his wife knew of this. He took with him the little water available just in case the journey may take him further beyond his plan. His mission was to see if he could get a river so that his people could come and get water from it before the period of drought passed away. After a long and tireless journey, he stopped to rest under a big tree. About 2 hours later, he stood up to continue his search for water again. Suddenly, he saw a skinny man who lay lifeless on the ground. The king went closer to him and discovered that the man was still alive. He must have fainted, probably because of lack of water. A thought told him to bypass the man and continue his search, but another thought warned him to stay and help the man. As he bent down to help the man, the first thought came up again. If you use the only water with you for this stranger, how will you survive? Don't you know the journey is still far? The king shook his head as a sign of rejection. He ignored the questions, took out the little water and poured a little on the man's tired face. Like a miracle, the man opened his eyes. The king helped him up and gave him the remaining water to drink. The skinny man grabbed the container and drank the water hurriedly. The king smiled. He was happy he had saved a dying soul. He turned to leave. The man grabbed his clothes and said, "Thank you for saving a soul from dying today. Henceforth, the curse pronounced upon you and your people is removed now and forever." The skinny man struggled to say with the remaining strength left in him. The king smiled again, even though he did not understand the man's parable. He knew the man had just blessed him. The thought that warned him not to bypass the lifeless man told him to go back to his palace, but take another route that leads to the only cave, which is at the outskirts of Dandi village. Why that abandoned cave? Why can't I take the shortest route, seeing that I have no water again? The king asked no one in particular. He got no answer. He decided to obey the voice. He passed through the route and was almost going past the cave when he saw a young boy coming out of the cave with a container filled with water. He moved closer to the boy to ask him some questions. "Halt, or I'll kill you." The king toughened his voice to scare the boy. The boy stopped. He was frightened and started fidgeting. "Who sent you here to get water, and how did you know there is water in this cave?" the king asked again in his dramatic new voice. Instead, the boy dropped the container and ran away fast. It was getting dark already. The king could not run after the boy because he wanted to find out how he got water from a cave that had been abandoned after the war several years ago. He decided to check it out. Stepping inside the cave, by the right side, he saw a lot of containers stored with water. By the left, he saw non-perishable food that showed it had been kept for use anytime the owner needed it. Who did all this in the midst of famine in the land? This selfish fellow must have known ahead that there would be a drought. The king thought over and over again. He carried just one container of water and one sack of food and left the cave, still wondering how water and food got to the cave when the people were dying of hunger and thirst. Back at Ginadu's house, his grandson told him everything that happened and how he ran away so as not to be identified. "I told you to always go there when it's getting dark so no one will see you," Ginadu scolded his grandson. "Papa, I followed all your instructions and no one had seen me since I have been going to the cave except today," the boy said. "Who was the man that saw you? Can you recognize him if you see him outside?" Ginadu asked his son. "I don't know him. He resembled King Goya but with a different voice," the boy answered. Ginadu told him that it can never be the king because the king does not walk alone. He will always be with guards or servants. Who could it be? The old man thought. Gradually, a wind began to blow outside. It graduated into a violent one with so much voice and noise. The sound of the wind disrupted Ginadu's thoughts. He stepped out to see what exactly was happening outside. As he came out, a tiny drop of rain landed on his forehead. "What? Rain? Who on earth unlocked my curse?" Ginadu shouted. He was furious to see rain in the land of Dandi despite all his incantations. He went in to grab his staff and other materials. He stood at the center where three paths meet and started conversing with the works of nature. The rain refused to stop. It became heavier than before. Ginadu began to speak in an unknown tongue. The rain fought back harder. Suddenly, there was a spark in the sky, followed by lightning and thunder. It struck Ginadu, making him slump. It rained all through the night until the following day. There was great joy and celebration in the land of Dandi after a long period of hunger, thirst, suffering, pain, and death. The people came out, both young and old. They danced and rejoiced because the rainfall was a blessing to them. King Goya remembered the parable and smiled. The love and attention he showed to that skinny man had unlocked the curses placed on them by the wicked rainmaker. It happened that over the night, Ginadu's grandson rushed to the palace while it was still raining. He came to inform the king that his grandfather slumped while trying to battle with nature and died in the rain. As he was talking, the king recognized his face and asked him why he stored water and food at that abandoned cave. The boy explained how it started and the reason why his grandfather placed a curse on the people. King Goya felt like cutting off the young boy's head, but he controlled his temper. He called for the kingmakers. Only 4 remained. The others had died during the drought. They reasoned together and concluded that the next thing was to bury Ginadu's body immediately. The kingmakers, Ginadu's grandson, together with the palace guards, went to the outskirts of the village to bury Ginadu's body. It was still raining, but since Ginadu didn't die a natural death, his body cannot stay long in the land, lest another disaster befall the people again. After the burial, the king wanted to banish Ginadu's grandson, but the kingmakers advised him not to. He listened to their words, but warned the boy never to become wicked and selfish like his grandfather. All this happened overnight when the people heard about the death of the rainmaker. They felt for him a little because he had served the village for a long time, but they didn't like the curse he placed on them. As a result, no one mourned his death. Instead, they were glad to see the rain.